In order, if we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Anybody for public forum? Okay, perfect. All right. So public forum. Again, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Individuals speaking during public forum should not expect an immediate response. If we are going to respond, we'll do it within a reasonable time. And again, please refrain from addressing any student, faculty, or person individually. That's about it. So the first one we have is Heather Hanrahan. Heather Hanrahan.
Good evening. I would like to thank Dr. Jameson and the Board of Education for the opportunity to share our thoughts with you this evening. My name is Heather Hanrahan. I am a teaching assistant in preschool, specifically Home Space 3. I join you tonight as a parent, a long-term community member, and a voice for our support staff. I am here to advocate for a meaningful increase in salaries for our support staff. The progress the administration has made to date has given us confidence in a more equitable future. Some examples include creating a compensation model for support staff, moving non-certified staff into the upper 25th percent of pay, while also acknowledging there is a greater gap for certified staff in comps as they are in the bottom of the 25% of pay. They also offer grants to those who want to grow their own education, including a teaching certification. Why this matters. First, the support staff are critical to MRH. In today's education, no matter the position, we are called to deal with new and different situations we have not encountered in years past. The stakes are higher than ever, and the role of a school employee is asked to take on a lot more than ever before. We face effects from social media, ripple effects from the pandemic, and overall safety with an increase in intruder drills. Our dedication impacts every student and teacher in our district, yet our compensation does not reflect our vital contributions. Second, current wages are not competitive, leading to high turnover. If we want to attract and retain skilled employees, we need to pay them fairly. Many non-certified staff live in our community, contribute locally, and are committed to the success of our schools. But low wages force many to either take a second job or to go to another district with higher pay. We shouldn't have to choose between our passion of our work for this work and financial stability. Third, we need to continue to lessen the gap between certified and non-certified staff. Here's why it's important to keep the conversation going. We believe there is a real disconnect between the job description, what we actually do in our roles, and how we get compensated. We perform leads roles when they are out of the classroom, including any amount of time, whether it's maternity leave or other outages, and we do not get compensated with leads pay like SSD or other school districts. Currently, certified staff, even when they don't work in the building, including inclement weather or other emergencies that require staff and students to remain home until conditions are suitable and safe for their return. Meanwhile, support staff have been asked to come to the building or take a PTO day or a day without pay. How is this not only equitable but safe for us? Finally, investing in the staff is the right thing to do. Fair compensation sends a message that our work is valued. I'm an example of a teaching assistant who is so committed to our kids in the district that I'm currently working on my teaching certification. I do this because I love the kids in the district. Assistant teachers are non-certified staff, and most of us make around $20,000 to $25,000 a year. We don't expect to make as much as the leads, but our ask is to please make a note of the significant discrepancy and difference of about $20,000 to $40,000. This gap will become even greater as we move certified staff closer to the top 25%. In closing, support staff play a pivotal role in our schools, yet our pay does not reflect our importance. By increasing our salaries, we strengthen our schools, improve outcomes for our students, and we invest in the future of our community. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin Freshour, she, her, and I'm the mom of Carol, who is in her second year at the ECC. I have a background teaching in special education, and I'm here to share my appreciation and excitement about the ECC. Ever since Carol was a toddler, she's been interacting with the same crew.
I'm going to ask that you not speak about any individual.
Oh, about my own child. Even my own child. Okay, sure thing. Ever since my own child was a toddler, she's been interacting with the same crew of kids at our neighborhood park. Before preschool, she had a desire to be around these kids as long as they stayed far enough away that they wouldn't interrupt her or show any interest in her toys. While some of this was developmentally appropriate, the isolation of the pandemic and being an only child impacted her social skills for the worse, and we were getting concerned. Luckily, she entered preschool along with several buddies from the same park, and the difference was night and day. Thanks to the expertise from her former teacher last year, her current teacher this year, and her amazing support staff in the classroom, she continues to be independent, but when we go to the park, she also loves being around kids and has the skills to actually play with them. One of the best parts of my week is drop-off because I catch a glimpse of how intentionally her educators have curated the learning space that has fostered such beautiful growth. I also wanted to say what a pleasure it was to listen to last month's presentation on kindergarten readiness. As a teacher, I saw that kids had to expend huge amounts of mental energy adjusting to various approaches as they transitioned to new classrooms. So I thought the point that consistency among classrooms was a productive goal, and I believe investment in professional development and curriculum resources are essential to meeting that goal. I was also thrilled to hear an emphasis on preparing pre-K kids with special needs for that more vigorous kindergarten schedule by increasing or getting them more and more time in the gen ed setting. I think that is critical to the success of these kids down the road, and I think it's meaningful that that was part of the conversation. But mostly I wanted to say that I have a ton of appreciation and confidence in the ECC administration, teachers, and support staff. I hope to feel the same way about all the schools as my daughter progresses through them. To that end, I encourage you, the board, administrators, to work towards showing the community that the district needs and deserves their support and investment. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Mr. Nelson Minton.
Good evening, members of the board and administration. I'm Nelson Mitten. I've been a resident of Richmond Heights since 1987 and spent 21 years sitting as a board member of this fine school district. I first want to congratulate the district on its APR scores. That's a tremendous result based upon all of the hard work of all of the teachers, support staff, administrators, and the board. So I congratulate you. I'm here to speak about the long range or the facilities plan that seemed to be presented in November of this year, last November. When I heard this presentation, I thought that was going to be the beginning of the typical long process this district engages in for facilities planning. Then at the work session in early December, it appears that the administration is urging the board to go out for a bond issue in April of next year. I found this rather surprising, knowing the history of this district. And I then went back and looked at the history of the last two bond issues in which members of the board and administration were involved. For example, the bond issue that passed in 2015, we started the process of long-range facility planning in May of 2014, nearly 11 months before the bond issue. The voters had to vote on the bond issue. In 2020, the process was started with the long-range facilities planning meeting in just wanted to make sure. A work session in January of 2019 where we retained an architect to basically assist the board and the administrators in developing the long-range facilities plan. Months, the last one, over a year before the bond was put before the people. Even go back further than that because I went to the records of the Mitten household and looked at the bond issue in 2000 that basically began the Renaissance. We started that process in the summer of 1999, and that fall engaged a group of 50 stakeholders to discuss to present information about the district's facilities and discuss and let that group set the plan for the district. This is the way bond issues are done in this thing. And I think it's very important for the board to put the brakes on this process, take a step back, and do the careful planning that is necessary for this community to be willing to pass a bond issue. And in light of the fact that I feel the administration put the board in a position to where they had to pass debt service levies higher than necessary over the last 2 years, I think it's imperative the board take full control of this process. Thank you.
Let's see, where were we? All right, consent agenda. I believe that we need to make an amendment to the consent agenda. If I'm not mistaken, you want to make a motion, Jenny? Do you remember, did you get Brian's?
You want Brian to make it?
Yeah, you can
It's
make
his
it.
motion.
Hey, Brian, do you want to?
Yeah, are we moving to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented. Second.
So I'd like to amend to move the warrant list out of the consent agenda since I and at least one other board member are named in the warrant list. I'd like to recuse myself from voting on it. I'd like to vote on the other items. So we can move the warrant list out and vote on the other items.
All right, can I get a second?
Second?
All right, so motion to remove warrant list from the consent agenda. Does anybody want to discuss that? No? All right, can we vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay.
Move to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, perfect. Okay, we're going to go down to study items. The budget directive discussion by Dr. Benita Jameson. Are you able to talk?
Good evening, board and community. I'm excited to bring the modified budget directive back based on the feedback that was received from the board. I'll go through and highlight some of the areas and provide rationale for why those changes were actually, sorry about that, why those changes were actually made. So some of the feedback that was received in regards to having level of specificity, instead of actually listing items that are already highlighted in district and school-wide plans, if you look at the second line, it includes specific goals outlined in district plans and also highlights the district 5-year strategic plan. The other suggestion that was made by Jenny in regards to adding the Board of Education in consultation with the superintendent, that information was included, and also I struck through will serve as the foundation for, and it's the development of the 25-26 budget. The categories remain the same from the feedback from the board. Those categories captured the essence of the work that we would like to see in the upcoming school year, but adjustments were made based on the feedback. So in looking at the first area, commitment to equity in all budget allocations, an addition was made to capture not only resource allocation, but the allocations to departments to ensure that we are being equitable in those distributions, as well as continuing with the zero-based budgeting approach where appropriate. For the second area, for academic gap closing programs for marginalized and underrepresented groups, we added some language which was recommended by both Jenny and Trent. The first area I added prioritizing or dedicating new resources, because we currently have resources that support closing the gaps. And in addition, adding the language of identified achievement gaps. We currently know what those gaps are, but we did add that language in as requested by the board. And the final addition to this particular item was, again, as outlined in district level plans. So whether that's the strategic plan, building level plans, any plan that the district actually completes, which could also include a professional development plan for the district. For the third item, curricular and instructional resources for academic improvement. We did remove instruct through and competency-based education, but put the focus primarily on math and literacy, because those are areas that we are already focusing in on this year, and then added back in competency-based education to just change the structure of the sentence for that. And we currently have a pilot taking place for math, and literacy will begin here shortly. So adding those areas where we're already working without having the level of specificity still captures where we want to focus our resources. For the fourth item, we said maintain support in infrastructure that protects safe and inspirational spaces. For this particular item, I believe that it was recommended to be placed in another area, but we made the adjustment and also included maintaining versus prioritizing for this one, and then that facilitates readiness to learn. So those were the changes that were recommended based on the feedback from the board. There were no changes recommended for item 5, and for item 6, for financial responsibility with strategic cost reductions was included in long-term infrastructure planning for maintenance. We did remove the language for deficit spending and modified it to reflect planning intentionally for ongoing budgetary needs, and then added while focusing on following area: competitive wages, which has been highlighted here previously, purchase services analysis to look at where our funds are going. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the finance presentation, and then also developing ongoing maintenance budgets. My hope is that these modifications capture the feedback that was provided for the board. I welcome any questions you may have.
Can we move this to an action item? Like, is there any reason why we can't vote on this tonight? Okay. I mean, if it incorporates everything we need.
So the version that you read does not seem to be the one where Katie made modifications, is that correct?
So her modification, similar to the process before, was added, and so anyone who sent those modifications, and they would be discussed openly like we had in the past. So if those modifications want to be added, now will be the time to discuss that, to add those in.
Going off the version that Dr. Jameson circulated, I mean, there were a few minor edits. I'm not going to hold up the process for a couple of slight word shifts, so.
I actually really liked your edits, Katie, because I did. I actually liked the version with your edits, because I think it captured some of the things we talked about a little more clearly. So, thank you for that.
So that is attached as a,
Just-
it has, the blue lines are what Dr. Jameson's edits were proposed, and the red lines, I believe, are my additions.
So how about we move to adopt Katie's version, incorporating both sets of edits? What's that? Just this week.
scenario that included what I'm referring to as the max levy, which would be, in essence, doubling what the transfer from debt service would be, so $1, to try and get us to a point to where we would be able to take our fund balance from where it is today and make it nearly the same at the end of that 7-year period. So I did that in a couple of different ways. So just setting the groundwork here, I'm looking at the summary page, which I will bring up now. Okay. So we know that the 50 cents will generate somewhere between $2 million and $2.2 million. We made a few additional changes as Dr. Jameson and I were reviewing these and talking through potential modifications and looking at historical data. We decided to increase the local revenue on 3 assessment years from 2.5 to 3.5%. We increased the projected $2 million from additional tax revenues to $2.2 million. And beyond that, the only other additions here is adding an additional 2 years and then adding another set of these scenarios that includes a $4.4 million increase to local tax revenue. So I will start here on scenario 1. There's a lot of numbers. They're really small. I apologize for that. But there really is no change in this from the work session. Scenario 1B, the green indicates a rate increase, which would only result in a decrease of the debt service levy of 50 cents. So we would then transfer that 50 cents over to the operating levy. And you can see here, this is with just a status quo increase. So a step increase to the teacher's salary, and then in-kind increases for support staff and admin. Then we go on to scenario C. This will be a $4.4 million add. It would be the 50 cents from the transfer, an additional 50 cents. And you can see here what that does to the fund balance over time. It's about 8% different from the 50 cents. So as you move through the years, as is the typical arc of school finance and funding, is you will ask the community for additional funds. I believe it's the XLR here. Okay, so as we ask the community for additional money in the form of operating tax revenue, we will build that up over time. At some point, we reach a max as salaries continue to increase, as the cost of goods and services continue to increase year over year, because we all know that nothing gets cheaper, it seems. So then you will see that the steady decline as the years go on. That is the typical arc. So you'll start low, we ask the community for more revenue, we build that up over time, and then we slope that back down, and then after we've exhausted what that tax rate can do for us, and then from there, we ask for more money, and the pattern begins again. So this first set of scenarios is just status quo. This is not adding any additional funds to the salary schedules, respectively, teachers, support staff. Then we move to scenario 2. Again, no change from 2A to 2B, other than you can see the dramatic difference as salaries, the cost of salaries continue to compound over time. This is a 2.25% increase to the base for the teacher salary schedule and a 2.75 step. So it would enrich the schedule, and then everybody would move up a step. This is the impact. Scenario 2B is adding the 50 cents from the transfer to the operating levy. You can see here that, again, we build that up, and then it almost immediately begins to move back down. And then by the time we get to fiscal 29, which is a reassessment year, we would be in a position where we would be needing to seriously think about asking more money or changing our staffing. Then we move to scenario 2C, which is adding 50 cents plus 50 cents, so a total of $1. And you can see here that stay a little healthier a little longer. So by the time we get to 3032, we're at that 39% fund balance, which is just a little bit higher than where we are projected to end this current fiscal year, fiscal 25. We move on to scenario 3A, which is a 5% increase to the teacher base, as well as a 2.75. And this is without adding any new money. This is no additional tax revenue other than what we would receive through the 3.5% increase on reassessment years, which admittedly is rather conservative, but that's what the board's asked me to present as the most conservative or worst case scenario as it comes to revenue. 3B is adding the 50 cents, and 3C is adding the dollar. And you can see on 3B, we would need to, between that 28 and 29 year, we would definitely need to think about going back to the community for an increase to operating tax rate. 3C, that keeps us to where we would be in a pretty decent position all the way through fiscal 31, and then things start to get a little bit too expensive in that area, so we would need to think strongly about doing that. So it would move us forward a few more years. Then, scenario 5B. This one adds 5% in year 1, 2.25% in year 2, and 2.25% in year 3. And you might ask why I did that. It's because right now our teachers fall out of 13 school districts, surrounding school district. They are number 12 or 11. So right at the bottom, there's only a few districts that are lower than us as far as starting and ending salary. So this was a bit more of a dramatic increase. There's a number of different ways, and we're going to continue building models as we move through the budget season, the negotiation season. But you can see here, I didn't bother putting in the 5A, which would be no additional tax revenue. It tanks too fast. So I just went to the additional 50 cents. You can see here, if we did that steadily over the course of 3 years, by 2029, we would be in a position where we would absolutely need to make some significant changes, either to increase revenue or decrease staffing. We were pretty tight, and I would say we're pretty tight on the purchase service supply side, capital project side. We're trimming nearly $1 million out of that, if not $1 million, as we move into this next budget year, which is going to be extraordinarily difficult. But we're going to do our best to do that, as that was the board's request. Looking at 5C, we had $1, just like in the other scenarios, and you can see if we were to do that with this particular cycle of increases to teacher base pay, that would get us to a position where we would be at 30% in 2032, which is very healthy. So we would probably at that point need to think about it in the year after that, so 2033. These scenarios, the 5 to 2.25, 2.25, if we were to do that all in 1 year, that would get our teachers closer to that top 25, that third quartile. However, understanding that everybody is going to move up their salaries from year to year, if we applied a 3% growth factor to every other school district around us, that would put us right back around median, maybe even just a little bit lower in some of those spots by the time we got there. If we stayed status quo at 2.75 on years 2 and 3. So all in, I don't have this model for you, but we spent a lot of time doing it. Excuse me, we're about $1.7 million in additional salaries if we were to do that increase all in 1 year. And then it would be about an additional, Dr. J, do you have that in front of you? It's about $450,000, I believe, for the next 2 years, as $247,000, $237,000 respectively on those 2 consecutive years. So you can see here, to my earlier point, things don't typically get cheaper, and our competitors have moved their salary schedules or increased their salary schedules over the past couple of years. While we have done that, they've done so at a greater rate, and it's caused us, we're quite far behind. So we have a bit of ground to make up. So what I've shown here, I believe, is a conservative look at the revenue. It's quite possible we could do better than this, but we can't hope on something as important as the revenue streams that are coming into the school district. What questions do you have?
It's not really mechanism of how this would work. And so I think also there was a discussion during that work session about there's only so much that we can do as a district without requesting help from the community. So it really is just sort of what's a priority for everybody out there. What are we going to do? We don't really have a choice at this point. I mean, there is no choice but to go out for this instrument. So anyway, that's all I got.
And I would say that we've been very careful. Every time that we've gone for a tax levy, we've said that we would do our best to make that additional revenue last for 5 years. We're now in year 9. It's time. No one likes to hear increases. We're in a rare position to where we're able to do this at essentially a net zero increase to taxes. We move it from the debt service levy to the operating levy, so the impact would only be a result of the reassessments and any increases to assess valuation that would occur there.
And again, the reason for that would be there's two components. There's things that we would do. We first ask for the levy, and then the board has to act. The board has to then go back and move the column, to even out the increase or the savings. So just so everybody understands that, it's something that we can commit to, but there's a new board that's coming in April. I think that anybody running, hopefully they understand the importance of what we're trying to do here. So I can't speak for the future, but just so everybody understands, we're all trying to work here together to get this done.
And just to clarify the actions that would have to happen, it's two separate actions, right? We are asking for a tax levy increase, but where we're going to save money is by then voting next September, the board would vote to lower the debt service levy. So those two actions together would be a net zero to the public. It would not increase your taxes if they both occur.
Right, but we can't vote on, and that's.
No, I know, but I just want to be clear because it's confusing when we say transfer money, whatever. It takes two separate actions for it to occur.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's also transferring rate, not money.
Right, you're just switching the rates. You're just changing the rates so that the net is zero.
And we do have representation here from Stiefel. Rebecca's here. If there are questions that you would like for her to step up and answer to provide clarity, she is able to do that.
I did have one question, Chris. When I was looking at your numbers, I saw like in 2028 the salary cost is a little bit lower. Like that year on is a little lower. I don't know if you guys like reevaluated. So I'm on just the first page, so 1A. In 2028, it has salaries at $18,009,877, but the one we were looking at last time in 2028 had it at $18,047,000.
Yeah, we did make a few changes, but the salary schedule is actually designed to save money over time.
Okay, so that's the difference. I just wanted to know what the difference. Okay, it was just sort of a recalculation of that. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
It's not so much a question. I just two things. One, first of all, thank you, Chris, for preparing this because you and I spoke on the phone and I had asked for this, and so I appreciate you showing it. His charts here. And you mentioned this, but in the follow-up comments, this hasn't been said. You also have listed on your charts here a max rate, and what you've done here, and I think the public should know this because this is a really important issue and pertinent to our public comment section at Nelson's comment. What do we need as far as an increase to the operating fund levy to cover all projected expenses, and obviously primarily that's going to be salaries, for the next 5 to 7 years? And the no net tax increase plan that has already been talked about, was mentioned even a few moments ago, is not going to do it. So you need more than that. Otherwise, what's going to happen is we're going to come back to you, as these numbers show, we're going to come back to the public in just another 2 to 3 years and ask for another increase in the operating levy. And so I think the public needs to consider and maybe communicate with the board thoughts or whatever in future public meetings. Do you want to be asked twice to increase the operating levy, or do you want to be asked once? If you want to be asked twice, then we could do a no net tax increase levy in April, and then 2 years from now come back and ask you for another 50 cents. When we ask you for that 50 cents, the real dollar amount out of your pocket for every, just think about your home for a moment. If you have for every $100,000 of market value of your home, that's $95 tax increase. So if you have a $300,000 home, right, $95 times 3, right? Because you're charged on the assessed value, which is 19% of that, have this rate of 4.0176%. So we would need another 50 cents added to this plan. Or, as this chart is showing you, we come to you in April or presumably in the following year with a $1 increase. We get it all in one vote. And then we're set. According to this chart, we're set for at least 5, and in some of these scenarios, all the way out through 7 years. And that's what I think is the biggest issue for the public to understand. And is we are faced with that decision on your behalf. Do we come to you twice, or do we come to you once? Do you want the Band-Aid ripped off quickly, or do you want it ripped off slowly? Because either way, at some point, you have there's no way to maintain the salary increases that are requested for all the positions out there at the no net tax increase. And I think that just needs to be absolutely clear. And the other piece of it, of course, which I know is not part of this discussion, maybe it'll come up here in a little bit, is what exactly are we planning to do with the bond levy? What are the items in the plan? And that we still need to have sorted out.
And I would say, Brian, well, not part of my planned comments, since you brought that up, I will say that as we set our tax rates every year, we do have the ability as a taxing authority to roll back that rate. So the calculation will spit out a number that gives us our allowable revenue. We do have the ability to roll that tax rate back to reduce the tax burden on the local taxpayer, and then incrementally increase it through a resolution by the board as we move into the next tax year. So that could be an additional strategy for that larger increase.
Can we put that in plain words just for everyone? Does that mean if we went for $1 when we vote in September, we don't have to set it at $1? We could set it at 75, and then is that? I just want to understand it like in plain
It's more
words.
like add it all together. So let's say it's.
I'm going to have,
Oh, yeah,
we have
thank
Becky
Yeah.
from
Might as well have the
Let's let her
expert, yeah.
answer that.
Hi, Becky
She's
Espark
the
with
expert.
Stifel. So when you set your tax rate on the operating side, there is a maximum ceiling, the same way there's a maximum ceiling on the debt service side. With the debt service side, the district has historically rolled back based on commitment in prior no tax rate increase initiatives, and they've rolled back to remain constant at that tax rate. On the operating side, many districts across the state will set their tax rate at their maximum ceiling because over time that maximum ceiling decreases because you roll back to protect taxpayers from large increases in reassessment years. So most districts are up against that tax levy, but you do have the flexibility to vote that as a voluntary reduction. If that happens in certain years, in non-reassessment years, then you are stuck with that for the following reassessment year. So that's just something that if you started to go down that path, you'd want to be aware of, that committing to that in a non-reassessment year would be hold the district to that in the following reassessment year, and your option to remove that like kind rollback wouldn't be until the following non-reassessment year, if that makes sense. So setting that tax rate this coming year is a reassessment year in 25, so you're talking about whenever you do a voluntary reduction on the operating side only, so I'm only talking about the operating side, but whenever you do a voluntary reduction in 2026, which would be a non-reassessment year, you'd be stuck with that for 2027. So just something to be aware of as you're thinking about these plans. You have some flexibility, but there's some protections in state law to keep you from playing with that rollback.
I have a question generally about why it's structured sort of every 3 years rather than one big ask that would last a number of years. Right? Sort of my understanding of, sort of speculating about how the market might work. Is it that most districts actually do this every couple of years because that's a better way to gauge what their needs will be versus say, okay, we all want it at once, but things might drastically change within that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, as you're forecasting out, I mean, if you looked at your projections from 2 years ago, they're going to be vastly different than what your projections are right now, and probably your projections might look even different next year. And so there's just a lot of considerations, and the further you're trying to forecast out and say, hey, this takes care of us, 5 years down the line, it's always going to be a murky picture. So you're always going to be much more clear saying this is what we need for the next 3 years than this is what we need for the next 10, 15. So we see most districts look at here as kind of our near term. You're looking at that 5 to 7 year horizon, so being mindful of that. But yeah, most districts, I would say, particularly on the operating side, are trying to take care of, a 3 to 5 year period, because that's what they know the most. And 3 to 5 years down the line, you're just going to have that much more information. The same is true on the debt service side. Usually we have districts that are coming up with their 3 to 5 year projects. Some of that, Jason Terry's here with bond counsel, so he could speak to this more, but that's what you're going to spend your proceeds on, is in a 3 year period.
I just concerned, like, I'm not to take away from Brian's comment or whatever. I just think that there's a danger in saying we can fix it all with one levy without knowing what it's going to look like in 3 years. I think that the more conservative approach would be the 3 year approach, the safer approach. Personally, I just think it's easier to gauge what the needs are in a short term rather than saying, okay, this is our budget, now you're stuck with it for however long. Because even though, and I guess this is the sort of politics of it, if we, the board, say we're not going to ask you for something, and then inevitably we have to ask you for something, then all of a sudden people will resent that versus, every 3 years or every 5 years. It's just how it's going to have to be, with us working within what we've got. I personally just think that's the better way to do it. But
And also, a lot of things happen in a period of 3 to 5 years, and I probably should have led with this, but the further out these projections go, the less accurate they are, because we create them. These models are based on the best information that we have on hand at this time. And like Becky said, next year, if I were to go through this exercise again, these would be vastly different.
But to be clear though, if we're raising salaries with the money, that is a cost that will go up every year. So I want to be clear about that. So we will need money in 3 years. I mean, how much we need may be different, but there's no way we can sustain without doing that. So I think that's the point, and it's, do we decide, like Brian said, take the 3 years, don't charge the public anything else, and then reassess, in that 3 year time. But I think the public should know you will have to vote for an increase, or there will have to be drastic cuts because we won't be able to sustain it. I mean, that's
right. And that's really the point. That's
Yeah.
the choice that we're essentially making, is that, if we want to get to, and again, I can't say it enough, like how great the teachers, the staff, the students, everything they did over the last couple of years, like how it's really just paying out dividends. The MRH stock is just soaring, and we couldn't be prouder of all the work that's gone into that. But that comes with costs, obviously. And, if that's something we value, that's something we have to save for. All right.
So, Chris, can you say something about how you came to the number of $1.7 million of salary increases, and then 2 years later, 450,000?
Sure.
What was the basis of that model? How did you arrive at the numbers? What were the comparisons? What was the target?
So we were trying to get up into that upper 25th percentile there, and 1.7 represents
And so we need a larger sort of look at this. And then some of the budget language in the thing is about maintenance and maybe moving some of our maintenance budget out of bond issues and into annual regular maintenance on some of our buildings.
Sure, we know the longer equipment is in service, the more expensive it gets to repair.
Yes, the longer we put it off, the more expensive it is to repair.
Correct. I mean, your points are well made. I was asked to show what it would take to get there, so I feel like I've done that.
Yeah.
And also that number doesn't include the increases that we would put into support staff or admin salaries. And it's also worth mentioning again that our administrator salaries are at the bottom as well.
But your numbers factor that in.
The numbers factor.
The numbers factored in,
Not
so
the-
all the
not the
calculations
one that I
do.
gave you.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
1.7, that's just to get the teachers where they need to be. And that's the tricky thing with deficits, because when we start adding revenue, the first thing we have to do is fill that gap. We have to fill the hole first, and then we can start building back that fund balance. So the longer we wait to do that, the longer it takes, the more money it takes to fill that hole. So
Yeah, I think the conversation is around how much do we need to fill the hole?
Any other comments, questions, concerns? All right, thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
So, 3.3, we're going to go to the ballot measures discussion with Dr. Jameson.
Thank you. So we brought back the ballot language and also incorporated from the questions and feedback that Jenny actually asked, and we did have follow-up conversations. So what you're seeing here is the original language that was suggested for the debt service levy transfer of 50 cents to the operating levy, which would take us down to 85%. So a couple of the questions that were asked, and we made the modification here. I'm on the wrong one, actually. Sorry about that. This one is the original. So Jason Terry is also here from Gilmore and Bell, just in case there are additional questions. So the original one that we brought before the board during the work session is exactly the same as it was presented by Sean and the questions that were actually asked. The follow-up question was the change in the language to make it more understandable for community, and the feedback that was received that by the statute 164031, there's a statutory form for ballot language, and so if you wanted to change the language, you would have had to delete a portion of that. So what you're seeing here is the original language, which is what administration is proposing and what Sean from Gilmore and Bell is proposing. However, we did look at the additional language change that was suggested, which was the modified version, which is here for you to review. And so what's been removed out of this particular example is the language, if this proposition is approved, the total levy of school district is expected to remain unchanged due to an expected decrease in the debt service levy of the school district will offset the 50-cent increase to the opening levy of the school district. So this particular example removed that language, and it was recommended by Sean from Gilmore and Bell that we use the original language that was sent over, but I did want to incorporate that too.
And I just want to clarify, so my question was, so it didn't make sense to me to have the rate increase language in the sentence about how we're lowering the rate to pay for it. It made more sense to say, hey, we're going to increase your rate to this, and this is what the resulting change would be. It's my understanding that in order to do that, you have to remove the second sentence. So I had told Dr. Jameson, well, I want the second sentence in there because I think it's important for people to know how we're going to do that. So that was it. So I would stick with the first one we were given. I just was asking that question to see if it was possible, and it turns out it's not. So because it's Missouri. That's how they've done it.
So that's the first one, and the second item was the language in regards to the bond itself. And so in looking at that, just for clarification, because one of the questions that was asked was, what was the total amount that could be asked based on our current debt? So based on the 15% assessed evaluation, the district could borrow $68.5 million, and then it would be minus what our outstanding debt is, which is $38.2 million, which would leave us at about $30 million for debt capacity. But with the rollback of the 85 cents to 85 cents, we only can actually borrow $15 million. So this reflects the adjustment based on the questions that Jenny asked at a previous work session. So these two items will come back, barring any changes or questions from the board, later in January for some future conversation. A part of the added work, just as a note, when we talk about the bond, we are currently working with an architectural firm to do some of that work, and that information will come back to the board as well.
Well, I think, thanks for that. And I think that it might be a good time to sort of explain, how the bond sort of came about. Because my understanding, we had just finished a project. We noticed that there were additional capital improvements that needed to be made, along with some other maintenance that had been deferred for quite a bit of time, and along with some concerns about some other facilities like the track. And so the timing of the bond, and I certainly appreciate the community's concern about the traditional timing versus how we had done that, but we were kind of on an expedited schedule because we'd already sort of laid the groundwork for a lot of the things that needed to be done, and also to the extent that we can provide additional information about everything that's sort of gone into that process. I'll hopefully be able to send out a note to sort of says, to be like, okay, these are all the things that we've done, and this is how we got there. So hopefully that'll be helpful to the community.
Could Dr. Dietrich clarify, when did the management oversight team start reviewing facilities for these?
It was last academic year, I can tell you exactly which one.
So there's been review by a group of community members with expertise in facilities, right?
I'm going to have him to go up to the mic, Katie.
I'll take this moment just to remind our board to use your microphone in front of you, because we've been receiving some feedback via YouTube that unable to hear you. So we'd love to hear you loud and clear.
Don't they have to sub us to do that? Or whatever. Give us the little.
Yeah, so we did have a management oversight team last year. And going into this year, it was made up, we have community members on it, which include parents who, probably the biggest benefit is some of those parents are architects that have been very beneficial in helping us plan this out at no cost, which has been really nice. But at the same time, there's other parents on there. There are staff members on there. There's administrators on there. There's been teachers attending meetings. So we started this last year. We've also had our board committee, which met last year and this year. So we've been working through that process of, we've walked each building. We've been trying to identify things. We've worked with Navigate a little bit. And then even today we had interviews where we were looking at a full facility maintenance review. So we had those interviews today, and we're scoring those now. And then that will give us, we were very encouraged by the depth of those reports, because not only will that help us really targeting down and identifying what we need to be doing immediately, but some of those plans are targeting out to, 10, 15, 20, 25 years on individual units, which is something that we are not doing now and not something that we've ever done.
My concern, I think it was raised, is that we're just saying we want 15 million, but we haven't determined, like, do we need 15 million, right? So I guess, like, we have this whole presentation, but included in that is metal detectors at the ECC, right? That is a huge thing, I think, as a group, we would need to discuss. And so my concern is, I want to be clear when we go to the public that we have a plan with exactly what we are going to spend it on, which is why I had kept asking about when we would get the timing of that sort of prioritization. And I think we as a group should know before we set an amount what we really need, because I do recall, like, I remember the last bond, like, really great presentations by the board about this is exactly what it's going to be spent on. So I guess that's my question to the group. I'm not comfortable just saying give us 15 million without, like, a clearly delineated group decision about what we're spending it on. That makes sense. I don't know if anyone else.
So I just want to add, so part of the additional facility condition assessment was based on questions that came from the board. And we also noted when it was raining profusively that we had a leak, that it's been an ongoing leak at our high school campus. And so we recognize that there are some things that we don't see with our own eye, but this item is coming back in January, and we should have. So we do the cost that we've given so far, and I have had conversation with Dr. Dietrich in regards to the weapon detectors, so he's clear that those will not be included based on the feedback from the board. And he will be bringing that information back to the board strategic committee, and then also back here in addition to whatever we get from the facilities condition assessment.
So in January, before we vote on the amount, we would have an understanding of what we're going to spend it on?
We should.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say we'll have a better understanding. That full review will not be completed yet, but we'll have a better understanding of what that looks like.
And at least the most pressing issues, like, I mean, I would like to see, like, if you were just going to give sort of like the elevator summary of what it was, just to have, all right, there's a leak, we need this plug, there's whatever, like the things that absolutely we have to do, so that if we were going to ask for, like, the bare minimum just to remediate those most essential problems, like that, I think is what is most important.
And we do have costs associated with the items that have been reviewed with the management oversight team with a preliminary number, and that doesn't include backing out the metal detectors, so we can push that back out in the next board note so that the board can see that again.
Okay.
Great.
I do think we shouldn't underestimate how much a potential, like, showcase project of the track costing too. I am very cognizant of the fact that previous boards have considered that as a space, and just with some of the changes in the community around the track, I think there will be a lot of potential expensive unknowns once things start to get dug up there. So that's
You're referring to the environment.
I assume there'll be a contingency. I mean, there's a contingency built in.
Again,
You're
yeah.
saying a higher. I mean, that seems to be the trend with our last few construction.
That, again, the idea of a kind of major showpiece being, that focus is obviously something we've been hearing for a decade. And then the other necessary upgrades and repairs.
On the same sort of note, I think that we have a list of needed things and then some wanted things, and that number is even greater than 15 million. And so, again, we're going back to sort of how much money do we really need to sort of operate the school district at a level where we want it to be. And we need to figure out how big that it's a combination. This is where the operations has to come in to a yearly annual operation or facilities budget plus the bond budget, because it's going to be more money than the 15 million.
Right, and I think that, to your point, I think that it's, obviously there's things that have to be fixed, and that's kind of the pressing concern. But once those things have been identified, then being extremely conservative about, how much it would cost to maintain, I think that's an excellent idea. Working into,
We have a lot of deferred units.
right,
I mean, an excessive amount as far as.
right. It doesn't get better with age.
Well, and I think a point that we raised at our work session and that Chris brought up was that we're spending, a lot of our purchase service costs are coming from fixing, Band-Aiding the things that we've deferred. So once we fix them, we can save money there and have more money in our operating fund, which is what pays salaries and things like that. So the two together will really help us go further in
Right.
getting staff where they need to be in terms of their salaries.
So, all right, perfect. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? All right,
Oh, sorry, yeah, Josh. So by what date would we get an itemized list of these things for the bond that could potentially be used for capital improvements?
So we can give you, I actually was typing a task to Dr. Dietrich and this lovely new Assembly platform for us to connect to talk about a timeline for that. What I did share with Trent earlier was what that looks like as far as the detailed maintenance plan for 5 years, 10 years. But I will need some time to actually talk to him to give a specific timeline, and I'll send that out to the board.
okay, so now we're moving on to the next item, which is the Discover Club and preschool rates by Dr. Bashard and Ms. Stinson.
I'm back. All right, good evening, everyone. While that's pulling up, I'm here with Tanisha Stansel, principal of the ECC, and I have Dr. Bashard. She is our director of federal programs. I'm also going to introduce to you Dr. Bo Ricker. It's his first year with MRH, and he is our assistant principal, and he has been a part of this process. As I continue running the building, he's done a lot of the historical work with Dr. Bashard, myself, and Mr. Chris Holzer. So please welcome and stand up. Yeah. He's been a great addition to MRH, and I'm very appreciative of his leadership and his expertise that he brings, specifically in the area of finance. So thank you both for being with me, and of course Chris Holzer for the teamwork that it took to get to this point. And so as I was with you last month, we talked about that there was going to be an increase in funding for early childhood from 4 to 8%. And so our goal was how could we increase how we use the funding to align with our strategic plan and MSIP 6 standards and actually give more access, more equity, and readiness for our students. And so then as we go through the rest of this, everyone will take a couple of slides, and then of course if you have any questions, we can answer them. But we hope that we've given enough information that it's very clear for us all here today. So I'm going to hand it over to Chris Holzer to talk about the history.
Wonderful. I'll take this next slide here. It's been a busy 2 months with all of these projections and models, but I think it's good work. So while preschool is designed to increase our kindergarten readiness for all of our young children, there is a business aspect that goes along with this as well. Our preschool program is a fee-based program, which means we charge tuition for it. And let me walk you through this first one. I'll do it quick. Again, I apologize. These schedules have small numbers. I don't really know how to make them much bigger. You can see the revenue across the top. The expense is the next line. profit loss, since we are talking in terms of business. So you can see the deficit or the loss that we're experiencing each year as a result of our current tuition rates. And I believe we are at our max enrollment based on licensing? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so the last row here is the cumulative impact of those losses over time. So by 28, if we do nothing, and we will be at an accumulated deficit from 24 forward to 28, so a 4-year, 5-year deficit there of $2.2 million that we've spent that we didn't earn revenue on. Let's go to that next slide. Okay, so how do we fix that? Well, you heard me say when we were talking about salaries and the overall budget, the deeper your deficit, the more money it takes to fill it, obviously. So the goal here isn't to make up the money that we've lost in the past. I am going to be very careful as I walk through this because this is about kids and kindergarten readiness, but there is also this aspect of finance that we can't ignore. If we were our salaries, we know, get more expensive at least by 2.75% a year. We know that our benefits increase anywhere from 9 to 15%. It just depends on how things are going. We know that in our current economy, healthcare costs continue to rise at an alarming rate. If we were to raise our tuition rates by 10%, you can see what happens here. The deficits lessen, but they do not go away. So if we did 10% for 3 consecutive years, beginning next year, which is the 25-26 school year, or fiscal 26, by the time we get to 28, we would be at a $161,000 deficit. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's not all that bad, considering where it is today. However, if we're talking about budget, if we're talking about decreasing expenses, we have to talk about this as well. If we had 15%, you can see that by 28 we would be projected at about an $18,000 to $20,000 deficit. If we added 20% for 3 consecutive years, we would be at 136 net positive, 136,000 net positive. Now, I will also be careful to say that our goal in the preschool programming is not to make money. This is not a revenue generating for the purposes of profit proposition. Again, preschool readiness, or kindergarten readiness, making sure that our kids are prepared. Also, that social development is so important at those young ages. So this is what it would take financially to get us into a place, not to fill the deficit that we've already accumulated, but to begin to get to a point where the program is operating at least at a zero.
All right. I'll hand it over to Dr. Ricker.
Good evening. Thank you, guys. So preschool tuition rates across the area are calculated many different ways. It's calculated, some have 10-month tuition rates, some have 12-month tuition rates, some have schools that start at 6 a.m. and close at 6 a.m. Our school, we have the school day, and then we have before and after care. So the best way for us to try to figure out what the tuition rate could be was to look at more of a market rate. And you can see for a market rate, it's $42, and a half day is $31.50. We are very fortunate here at Maplewood, Richmond Heights, and the Early Childhood Center to have certified staff in each one of those teaching positions, and that's very unique, and I think that is a tradition that should continue, and it's something that we should celebrate because we're offering a quality program to our constituents. So we're able to charge what we would call an enhancement rate of $52.50, and then you can see the corresponding rate for a half day. And as you can see right now, our current rate that we're using for a daily rate is $42.92, and then you can see the corresponding half-day rate. We are, right now I want to point out our current enrollment where it is. We have a lot of different tracks. Ms. Stansel talked about that increased funding. We're lucky enough that we're going to be able to double our ADA slots next year because of the increased funding from the state of Missouri. So we'll actually go up to about 28 spots from 13. So that is huge because that was going to provide more access and more equity for our students that may not be able to afford our current rate, but there is a state subsidy that'll be able to help provide offset that cost for those families. So here are the historical rate. Go ahead, Chris. I'm going to let you talk about it.
Let me get my head around this slide. Again, a lot of numbers, I apologize for that, but this slide is intended to demonstrate that we have not increased rates very much at all. The last time we raised rates was just before COVID, and I believe that was, I think it was the 18-19 school year coming into the 19-20 school year. And of course, we didn't have school the second half, didn't have preschool the second half of that year, and I believe it was the next year we also didn't have it. So this is to demonstrate what the historical tuition rates have been for both half-day and full-day from 2010 to 2024-25, which is this current year.
So these are our current rates that are published on our district website. I'd like to point out that there are 6 different tracks that parents have the options to choose from. What we're really going to highlight in the presentation moving forward is that 5-day full tuition rate of the $7,124.25, and then that 5 half-day rate of $3,562.13. Another point, you can see that we do charge a registration fee. It's quite a nominal fee if you compare that to the districts throughout the county. Also, we do ask for a snack fee. That 5-day, full-day snack fee is $55 for the entire year. So you can expect the cost of food and services to increase.
We give a lot of snacks.
Snack.
Yeah.
I have a drawer in my office, and it's visited frequently.
snacks, right?
So that is a cost that we do incur. We don't necessarily charge for meals. Our meals are included in our tuition, and we charge that nominal snack fee. So I just want to point those 2 items out because they are costs that are increasing.
Question, I don't mean to interrupt your flow here, but have y'all considered doing some sort of sliding scale? My concern is that, you know, if we do sort of a across the line increase, that might negatively affect some families and then have a nominal effect on other families. And you know, so I wish there would be, you know, some way to sort of incorporate that concern into it, like when you're doing these projections, like, because I know that we've looked at other of our programs, like our early college, we've looked at, you know, not doing that for free anymore, but also, you know, having sort of a sliding scale, or same thing for like ACT prep. You know, sort of like, we don't want to limit the people that can take advantage of this, because realistically, I mean, the more prepared they are, the lighter lift everybody has through their matriculation. So anyway, that's my only comment.
No, I think that's a great point.
But I would also say, in the next breath, we also have vehicles in place for those folks. We have Head Start.
Yes.
Correct.
And we have, now that the state of Missouri's begun partially funding portions of our preschool as a percentage of free reduced lunch at the K-12, we're able to offer that tuition to those families that qualify up to a point at no charge. As if the state's giving us money, we can't also charge money. So.
And that's the ADA.
That's the ADA.
So it's not Americans with Disabilities Act,
No.
right? Because that was where, what is
Average
it?
daily attendance?
Thank you,
Education
because that was throwing me a
yeah.
little. All right, and that's where you're saying we're doubling that number, so we're increasing the number of families who can benefit from that sort of.
Yes.
Oh,
Because they have to
Right. So-
qualify for free and reduced lunch to be
Got it.
identified as an ADA student, which means they do not pay
At
the
all.
tuition at all.
Okay, great.
So and if they come in under Head Start, they also do not pay for tuition at that point. So we will be able to increase the amount of spots we have from what we have this year, double that for next year, to increase the access for students.
And in terms of qualifying for ADA or Head Start, is that done by another outside organization, or is that paid for by the school district?
Or for Head Start, we do that on site through our own secretaries that in conjunction with Head Start. And for ADA, they just need to fill out the free and reduced lunch form, which is something that typically happens after, but it's a change that we hope to make, so we get that information up front so that I identify students sooner, so that we don't have spots just hanging out in students that need school that don't have access.
So you do have somewhat of a sliding scale already.
Correct, yeah, and Head Start doesn't fully pay for the entire thing, so there is a bit of a loss, so there's a slide there.
Yeah, but sliding
And the same
scale
for
is
ADA.
same thing. Yes.
So again, with the free and reduced lunch thing, that's sort of been a pariah for the board for a while, that people are not. Could you again explain why that is super important that everybody fill that out?
So it's a form that they would typically fill out later on in the enrollment process, and we just had a hard time getting parents to fill it out. But with ProCare, or what we're using now is ProCare, putting those forms in as a part of the enrollment process. We work with Mr. Vince Estrada to help us, and our social worker. They have parents fill out that form, but having them do it up front will help us identify them a lot faster than parents trying to get a spot, paying for it, and then finding out that they didn't ever have to pay for preschool at all. Now they've given us money that they didn't necessarily need to have. So the free and reduced lunch form is all we need, and if they qualify for free and reduced lunch, then they can go to our preschool.
And the free and reduced lunch, just to kind of drive this home, is also important in middle school. It is also important.
Oh, across the district, yes.
So everybody,
It's across the
Yeah,
district.
all of our federal funding is somewhat tied to it. So it's not necessarily on how much we get, but it matters with what our percentage is, and it affects everything else. In addition to that, the counts that we do a couple times a year are affected by that, and it matters with our ADA. It matters with our average daily weighted attendance calculation through the state.
I have one more. So then, in conjunction with that, is getting the word out to people who may not apply because they fear they can't pay for it, but knowing, so they know we have it. Do you guys do that already, or thinking about a way to do that?
As we evolve the process, just heavily communicating it, but making that a part of it and not an option. So right now, a lot of our families might think, oh, I don't need to fill it out. I don't think I'll qualify. But you don't know if you don't know. So just encouraging them to fill it out. And so how do we message that communication to them to let them know whether you think you will or not, you won't be able to move forward, hopefully, without completing the form, so we have it.
And parents as teachers is a lead into that as well. They make connections with families, and so they are fully aware of all of these options.
They're like letting parents know. Okay,
As
cool.
well as the social worker who actually created a free preschool flyer last year and sent that out in some wow boxes and postings, and feel free to hand that out to anybody else that you want, just to kind of advertise where that was going. So yes,
Thank
that was a push.
I'm sorry.
Next slide.
So on this slide, you can see the rates for current tuition as of pretty much last year. A lot of school districts are going through this process right now, currently in their board calendar. So there are increases that are taking place. You can see the local districts that we were able to get published information about. You can see Maplewood right there is somewhat in the middle. There are school districts that are charging a lot more. There are school districts that are heavily using some federal funds to be able to pay for some of those things. That's why you see some of them, like Hancock Place is a very low one. Kirkwood is near 10,000. Ladou's near 10,000.
Well, can I stop you right
Yep.
there? It's worth mentioning, you heard Ms. Stansel say it earlier, or it may have been you, Bo, that we provide our students with certified teachers. That is not a requirement in Missouri for preschool education. So if you see a rate that's substantially less than ours, it's likely because they are not using certificated staff. And as a district, and I'll speak for what I've observed as an employee of the district for 25 years, it is a priority of the district to provide that level of instruction to our youngest students.
And some of the districts, I believe Hancock Place is the one that's under that's low. They actually, I believe, have free preschool for all because their free and reduced percentages are high enough. So I'm not even sure who they're charging.
So the rationale that we've brought forward with you, working with our team, Dr. Burchard, Mr. Holzer, Ms. Stansel, and myself, is we want to bring up the school district in line with our area school districts for an average yearly tuition. And it's really important that we're trying to capture more students with what you refer to as the sliding scale of those students with the ADA, the average daily attendance rate, being doubled with the state funding. And we want to reduce the gap for kindergarten readiness. Those are the big M6 points that hit ECC, that kindergarten readiness and that attendance. So we're looking to try to combat both of those things. And then we really, really want to offset that revenue expenditure margins that are taking place that Mr. Holzer explained before. That kindergarten readiness is really important. Having those certified teachers at the ECC and at the preschool level increases us to be able to find and identify kids to get services. So when they begin the school year, they're in place. We've had some practice with them. They've already practiced going to school. The parents know what to expect. There's been a great relationship and a great bond formed. So when they get into that kindergarten readiness and they get into kindergarten, they can hit the ground running with a smaller amount of deficits if they were not to attend any preschool. So here are the recommendations, and you've seen multiple percentages over the budget report. You're going to see multiple percentages from us. It's really important to go back. We're focusing on those full day rates and that half day rates. We had those 6 different lanes. The full day rate and the half day rate, you'll see the increased percentages on the top. What that would be the impact to the base, which is that base was that $7,124.25 for that full day. That would be the impact at 10%, a yearly impact of the $712, and that's what it would be each month. Again, we charge tuition on a 9-month basis, a cyclical basis for our families. You go down on the bottom, and that's going to show you what the impact is going to be on the specific pocketbook of the parents and those type of things. So we've broken it down in different ways. After pouring through these numbers, looking at the market rates, seeing what other districts are charging, knowing that we are in a unique opportunity. We're one of the only licensed and accredited early childhood programs within our school district. It's our recommendation as our group to look at the 20%. That's why it is highlighted. And that will bring us closer to maintain that expenditure margin and try to close those gap while continuing our program and having our students ready for kindergarten.
And so just to have some next steps with this increase, we would develop a communication plan to families. So how do we package that and let them know how this happens? Continue to meet our state licensing and accreditation standards. Reconsider some requirements for entry into preschool, especially when we talk about our ADA. We have to be 3 years old by August 1st for the district to be able to recoup any attendance funds. So we just have to think about that so we don't accidentally get someone and then they're under ADA, but we get no recoupment from that. Analyze the cost-benefit analysis of First Friends just to see how that impacts us. Develop attendance solutions to increase kindergarten readiness. So we're kind of working through that. And with those federal programs, they do come with attendance requirements. And so we're just working through that on how do we communicate that to families so that we don't have students that are in those programs, but then they're not kindergarten ready or they're not coming to school. Implement the payment solutions in ProCare. And ProCare is our billing system that has a lot of functionality to be able to use it for different things, but it's really helped us gather our tuition for parents so that we can make sure that we are being financially responsible. And overall, the whole purpose is just to increase the programming for access, equity, and readiness. Questions?
I have a question. So the students that go half day or halftime, is it like an AM PM thing? So there would be like 2 students that fill up 1 full-time slot. Is that like for number wise?
When they do half day, they typically, unless they're early childhood special education, they're receiving those services, that may be a little bit different. Otherwise, students come in the morning and they're just basically missing their nap time. So they're either coming in the morning until 10:50 and going home, or they stay all day. If you're in a federal program, you have to come 5 full days a week. There's no option for that. You have to come every single day. So we only have morning tracks for a half day or full day.
So if we get like, let's say they come halftime and we get the halftime payment, it still takes up a full day slot, even though they only attend half day. Is that how that works? Or?
Not necessarily. So we just try to stay within licensing to have no more than 20 students at a time in a classroom. So for example, if a student receives special education services, they may be in our team taught home space, but then they will go back to their home space in the afternoon. So a teacher could essentially have a student occupying the morning space because that student's going to go home, but then the student's going to leave the special education setting and go back to the general ed setting, and then they occupy that spot of the half-day student. There's a lot of spot sharing that happens to make the whole.
I have 2 questions. What was the increase in the tuition for this year?
That was on that previous slide. 5 from last year.
I think the very first meeting, maybe it was the second meeting that I was on the board, we were given a presentation about increases in tuition at the ECC pre-K program, and it showed as I can't go back and pull up the document to double that leads me to my second question. If this might be for Chris, but on slide 4 with your with these projections of the 10%, 15, and 20, what I think should be clear, first of all, for the public is we're talking about 20% increases every year, right, for 3 straight years, right? Is it so? It's not just a 1 year 20%. If we've had 5% increases, over a few years each year, now we're talking 20% a year, another 20%, and then another 20%. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, that's what I'm representing.
You're saying you raise it again 20% the next year?
Yes.
That's what this represents.
Yes, we're talking 3 years in a row.
Oh, my heavenly day.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now let me come back. But apparently that's not dissuading families from sending their kids. So this is
Below that mark as it stands.
right. Okay. So then, sorry, this is my last question. Then, so when I look at just sticking with the 20% because that's the recommendation on that slide there. So you have projected revenue for FY26 of $965,000 versus the previous year budget amount of $766. So that to me is an increase of 26%. What's explaining the difference between the 20 and the 26? Are you suggesting that we're going to increase tuition by 20%, but actually it's going to attract more families, and then we're going to get more revenue as a result? Is that the?
No, it's not. It's not necessarily a raw percentage.
Okay.
The way that you're thinking of it. So I increased the tuition rate and then multiplied it out by the number of students that we would have. So again, it's a projection. It's as close as we could get with the information that we had on hand. This is about where this would land.
Okay.
Would that include the registration fee and the snack fee
This
too?
does
Is
not.
that in there?
This does not.
So then in the second year, FY27, the number actually goes up only 18.6%. And then for year 3, FY28, it only goes up 18.8%. So that the increase in revenue is actually is averaging over the 3 years 25% relative to FY25 budget. But I guess I'm just wondering, why is the percentage of the revenue side different than, say, 20% each year? What's explaining that?
Yeah, so there's other things other than tuition built into revenue.
Okay.
And there's, just like there is in the budget that we talk about all the time, we have local, we have state, we have federal, we don't have county. So as you compress all of that, we've received a significant amount of revenue for the Head Start program, and specifically for the purposes of program improvement. That's going away. So as we're doing this, we're basing it, I'm somewhat controlling for those losses in this. And so that's what, that would explain your percentage increase that you're seeing.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you very much.
So I had a question. I had gone back, I looked at the historical rate increases page, and I sort of did the math to kind of see what percentage we were increasing. And, it looks like in 12 and 13, we did some large increases, but then since then, it's either nothing or 5%. So you're saying that, so I misinterpreted the information. So what you're saying is that the proposal, with whatever percentage we're talking about, so we'll take the 20%, we would increase tuition by 20% this year, or next year, and then the next year we would increase it again by 20%?
Potentially, but we're talking about 1 year.
Oh, okay. So,
We're not asking for a 3-year.
oh, that was his question. I thought the answer given was yes.
Model.
The model is, okay.
Jamie, this is intended to show what it would take to get back to solvency.
Okay, so you're saying, okay. So I guess my concern is that this is a significant amount of increase to ask people. I get that it's, it's valid, it's, I think about the people sort of caught in the middle who may not qualify for free and reduced lunch, but also cannot afford this type of increase, and what such a large increase may happen to them. And also the other thing is whether I see we're low, but I have a sibling who decided he lives in a neighboring district, they raised their rates, and he kept his kid in daycare because it was cheaper, right? So we're not, I assume we're low enough, we're not concerned that will happen? Are rates still so low compared to daycare costs, or?
The market
Yeah.
rate that you saw is actually the St. Louis County area market rate.
Rate
So
for
that
daycare,
includes all
so-
childcare facilities,
Okay.
in-home facilities, and what people are charging.
So we're currently at that.
We're low.
We're lower than that.
We're lower than that. We're allowed to charge an enhancement rate because we're accredited, so we're lower.
Okay, okay,
Than the rate.
okay. That's just my only concern, is that you're gonna have a group of people in the middle combined with other costs.
And our hope is that those other mechanisms that I discussed earlier are able to absorb at least some of that, because that phenomenon does exist.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I think, Jack, I think to your question, it should be clear, next year, there's gonna be a request for another substantial increase. Maybe it's not 20%, but it's gonna be pretty substantial. And the year after that, it would have to be just to get us away from.
If we wanted to break even. Yes.
If that's what we value is.
So we would do the one and reevaluate, and, yeah.
And obviously, like, we are in this situation because the board has for a
Long time, yeah.
said, we think this is important enough
Yeah.
to invest taxpayer dollars. And if we wanted this to pay for itself, we would be paying everybody in those classrooms hourly to, to do the bare minimum. So.
Or would have raised the rate.
Right, yeah, so.
It seems like the 10% gets us, we're gonna cut our deficit in half annually by 2028. And we are still providing, it lowers our cumulative debt from 2.2 down to 1.7. So maybe a decent halfway point. But, and if you did tell people that it was gonna be 10% every year, then that would allow them to plan.
And I think again, it's not all that dissimilar from salaries. If we do not increase the rates for these fee-based programs annually, the teacher raise absorbs any increase that we would throw into it. So we are behind the curve, so we do have some ground to make up.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a shout out to ECC families. I like to do that, and ECC people watching.
That's two.
Oh,
you're
yes,
right.
I'm sorry, you're not done. It's a 2-for-1 tonight. So we also wanted to talk about the Discover Club tuition also, as it's somewhat related, but not quite. So we're bringing this to you as well. I can tell you with discussions with administration that the idea is to bring this every year because that is something that should be looked at every year. If we're giving staff raises and or steps on salaries, it's something that we need to revisit and look at every year. So the recommendation for Discover Club is also a 20% increase in tuition for the 25-26 school year. We do have a registration fee that has, to my knowledge, and Miss Betty, feel free to pipe in here, that has never been raised from $35 to $50, but we do not have a snack fee. But those registration fees do create a little bit of revenue that is not going to cover the amount of snacks that we spend also. So during preschool and aftercare, kids like a lot of snacks. So we do provide those for the students. Part of our reasoning behind this is to make sure that we're keeping up with the inflation costs and the increases in Discover Club wages since 2020. We want to allow for snack and supply and activity costs for engaging planning and updated materials and supplies. Toys break and materials are needed in order to run the program. So we want to make sure that we are continuously monitoring those things. And then continued implementation of the cost of an online billing system that allows the online payments, tracking, and tax documentation generating capabilities. They're taking a lot of time off of the staff to track those and do those manually, and I think it's a whole lot more accurate. I don't know how Mr. Holzer feels, but I think it's amazing. There's a finance overview. You want to take that?
Sure. So this, you can see here, we're in somewhat of a similar situation with preschool. It's the magnitude magnitude of it is quite a bit less, and let me explain why this is happening, especially for some of those folks that have been part of this, the leadership of this district, or lived in the community and used this program. Discover Club has historically been, it has made a profit, and those profits have somewhat offset the losses that the preschool program experiences. However, since the pandemic, and it was actually starting to telegraph a little bit before the pandemic, we were having a difficult time staffing the program. We just didn't have enough people that wanted to do that work to come in. It's hard work. It's only a couple hours here and there, but it's still hard work, especially after a long day that a small child has been in school. So we partnered, and I don't remember the exact year, but I think it may have been 23. We began partnering with YMCA. So Y Club came in, and they started working with our elementary schools. So Elementary Discover Club, as it existed prior, no longer exists. It's now completely staffed and maintained by Y Club. We still had a problem staffing, even at the ECC. So we brought Y Club in the following year to offset. What grade levels are they taking care of?
First and second.
First and second. So that leaves us the preschool and kindergarten. So of course, you know, money is what I do here. So I was worried that if we pulled too much of that away, that we would be in this position. But we had to do that in order to staff to provide the care for those children either before and mostly after school. So that's why these losses are in place. And again, the board has been very conscious of the rates that we charge either for these fees or tuition, and have been considerate of our community. And we're in this position now where we're now projected to start generating losses year over year until we do something to change it.
You'll see a similar finance overview projection that you saw for preschool. Again, this is what you're projecting out over 3 years for a 10%, a 15%, a 20% increase if you did that each year. So it's just looking at where the numbers land. And again, not raising rates consistently every year, but giving staff raises because you should, and do those things that it's kind of put us in this position to have to ask for something a little more than what we asked for last year. Discover Club also had a 5% increase in its rate, so that was it was a little increase, but as you can tell, it didn't make as much of an impact. But we do still service quite a few children, and so we're able to do that also because licensing allows us to operate the 2 sites with the YMCA on the one side of the building and the Discover Club on the other. So we're able to do that and provide more care for kids, as that was a big demand when there's no child care in the area. We are starting to see a couple of child care facilities come back. So I believe Salvation Army has opened back up. We are starting to see some hope in staffing. It seems to be a little easier to find a few people to work. So those are all bright lights coming down the pike. Anything else you want with the projection? Okay.
No, I mean, this is the same modeling concept as we used before. And if there is a loss, it is somewhat offset by any profits that we would have here. But you can see that 20% will still be operating at a net loss in 26. And that's really just because of the dramatic decline as a result of Y Club.
So the additional rate increase, we are recommending taking the registration fee from $35 a student to $50 a student. I will say we do also discount the rate if there's multiple children. So we don't charge the full $35 if there's more than one child, so that way there's a little offset to that as well. So there's a $4,500 expected increase in revenue from that particular fee. The area rate, we did review and update some of the area charges. As you can tell, these are all within reach of the school district. Preschool has different staffing ratios than even the kindergartners, and so that does, you have to have more people watching small children than you do the older children. So we want to make sure that we are maintaining those for licensing and accreditation as well. The School age do use Y Club. They do charge more. They're closer to what you see in some of the after-school rates. In fact, I think some of these school districts are Y Clubs, so that's probably why you see the rates. And then our market rate is based on this countywide services that includes the for-profit care centers as well. In 2019, we did raise tuition, and then again in 2023. So it's been several years since we've raised it. The overall historical, from what I could find, was 2017-18. We charged about $7 for aftercare. We are looking at a lot of aftercare just because that's the majority of the students that we serve. But the increase would apply to all of the rates that we have. And then in from 2019 to 2023, we operated at $9 a session a day. And then last year when we raised it 5%, it went up to $9.45 a session. And this is what Mr. Holzer talked about with the enrollment overview, so you can kind of see when Y Club came on board at the ECC particularly. We are still servicing quite a few children. I will say that some of the drop also was with AM care, so when we changed the bell schedules, there's not near the need for AM care as there has been in the past, and so that has decreased. But we still see quite a few children with the needs for the after-school care. We are not currently, to my knowledge, on a waiting list for pre-K and K. We have a few additional kids who are joining us that semester, so that number will go up a little bit. But I do know that the Y Club, it does have some first and second graders in their waiting list. And I don't know how many because they have not gotten back to me yet, so that's still pending. But they did increase their license at Y Club from 48 the first year. They were only allowed to take 48 kids, and now they're allowed to take 60. So they are at maxed 60 licensed spots. And then just some following updates. The state has changed some of the requirements. The Office of Childhood has really come down to work together with child care subsidy and licensing and some of the state rules and laws and adjust so that we were allowed to hire some students that are able to count in ratio, which means that a high school student who's 17 and wants some hours can come on over after school and get paid to help monitor children, whereas in the past they had to be 18 and lots of other requirements. So they've adjusted those a little bit. And then, like I said, the YMCA worked to expand its license, and we continue to see the state work on some childcare issues. It's an issue across the state. There's a severe lack of childcare facilities across the state, and so they're still continuing to work on things to push out to help with that. And then the Salvation Army, again, it opened up for some school-age care this year. And then, like I said, that billing system is helping us track and monitor and get some payments in and know who's paying and who's not and what needs to be done about it. So that's it. Any questions?
All right, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Oh, sorry, real quick, is this coming up for a vote to the board at some point, or just a discussion item tonight?
Yes, just a discussion. It comes back.
What date does it come to us for a decision?
It comes back at the January board meeting.
Now we're into admin communications.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Ward. I'm the Coordinator of Assessment, Data, and Accountability for the district, and I am here tonight. I'm here tonight to share our district annual performance report, or APR, which DESE provides to all districts every year. It's part of our MSIP program, the Missouri School Improvement Program. I don't know what that. Can somebody? Sorry. Okay, so one of the measures used, one of the biggest components of our APR score is student performance and growth, academic achievement, which comes from MAP and EOC scores. So the Missouri Assessment Program has its grade level assessments and end of course exams. So before I get into our specific APR, I just need to go over the district overall level of achievement, because these These are results from assessments given in the spring of 2024. They have already been shared with building owners, with teachers, parents, but this is now, they've been released from embargo and we can share them with the public. So here we are. Okay, so MRHs. First here, what we have are the 22, 23, and 24 overall percent proficient or advanced for all students in all grade levels for ELA, math, science, and social studies. So the assessment is broken down into below basic, basic, proficient, or advanced. So this is the percentage of students that are proficient and advanced over the past 3 years. ELA and math are given in grades 3 through high school. Science is given in grades 5, 8, and biology. And social studies is given at the end of the high school course, government. If you downloaded this presentation previously, you may notice a difference in the social studies numbers. I put in the board note just the reason behind that, but that is a small population, and so when I ran the public report, it does not have the advanced, so the students in the advanced category. So I went back and ran the internal reports and added those back in so that it could be a little bit more accurate and consistent with what I reported previously. So as you can see, we have more students in 2024 that were proficient and advanced in ELA, math, and science. And pretty holding steady there with social studies. The next slide has the state average of 2024 and MRH, also percent proficient or advanced, exact same assessments. And you can see we are above the state average on those. Next slide here. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to refer to something called a student group. For MSIP and APR purposes, a student score is considered in the student group if the student is Black, Hispanic, qualifies for free or reduced lunch, speaks English as a second language, or receives special education services. So as you can see here, these are the percent of our students that are in a student group that are proficient or advanced on those same assessments. So ELA, math, science, and social studies. And then the next slide is going to show that same student group with the state average across the state. All right, so that's an overall district level summary of our MAP and EOC, well, grade level and EOC assessment results. So now to get into the APR, or Annual Performance Report. This here just kind of tells you what it is. That measures progress in Missouri's students and schools towards their MSIP program. It is what is the primary factor in determining classification and accreditation of schools. This year's APR in particular, this is our third year with MSIP 6, and so we will have a composite score, which I will include. The other change is that some of our success-ready measures, which are ACT scores and some college and career readiness factors on the graduating class, since some of that data is hard to get accurately and correct in a summer, they now are turning that into a lagging measure. So the data you're seeing in this presentation for those measures are actually for the graduating class of 23. So the data for the 24 graduates is what I'll be working on now. They just released it, and we will make sure that's accurate and ready to go for 25. So that's one slight change. And then the only other change that I'll talk about a little bit more when we get there is that they've changed the leveling, the category, how many levels or categories there are for student growth. There were 3, now there are 4. That's really the biggest change there. The other 3, I guess I'll talk about it later, never mind. Okay. APR is 70% performance, 30% continuous improvement. These are the different components that go into this. I can go into detail here. We've got achievement and growth. Those are those academic measures that I was talking about are all under performance. Success ready, what I was talking about with ACT scores and college and career readiness, all still in performance. Graduation rate and follow-up in performance. The 30% continuous improvement is when we do our climate and culture surveys, turning in documentation on time, timely submissions. That kindergarten readiness, the individual career pathway plan, attendance, and our CSIP plan, or our response to standards, all goes in that continuous component, continuous improvement component. This next graph shows you how the points have gathered from 22 to 23 to 24. So like I said, this is our third year with MSIP 6, so they sort of rolled out some of the scoring. And so we are finally at full capacity. These are the full 200 points as laid out in the MSIP 6 plan. This year does include the 8 points for response to standards. Other than that, everything else is there. So now we can dig into MRH's APR for the 23-24 school year. So the next slide has the 3 different years side by side here. So our performance, remember 70%, continuous improvement is 30%. The number of points that we were possible, or total points, is those were actual possible points, and then what we earned, and then to what percent we earned in those categories in our final APR. So in 2022, our APR was 87.2% when you do that 70 and 30% calculation, then 84.3, and this year we are at 97% of points possible. As you can see, this represents a significant increase in performance and an increase in continuous improvement as well. And then, like I said in the beginning, since this is 3 years now, we have a 3-year composite score, which is 89.9%, even though we tried to see why. Can we not make that 90? No, 89.9. That's what it is. It's the numbers. We stick with the numbers, right? 89.9%. So that's our composite score over the 3 years. So here before, the next couple of charts just kind of break it all down to show you where everything falls. So academic achievement, graduate follow-up, all those things that have cutoff scores and like goals have 4 categories of floor, approaching, on track, and target. Those are the same that they were last year. But the growth one right there with emerging, approaching, on track, and target, last year those were below average, average, and above average. So those were 3 categories. This year they've changed it to 4, and that is all for student growth. So you'll see in my charts I change language because I'm comparing 22 to 23 to 24, and that is what that is. And then the categories, that's just did you do it or not, or did you meet the category or not, or met and not met. So those are the colors you're going to see and what they stand for. Obviously, the floor, emerging, and not met is not our goal. We are trying to get to target and met. So this next slide are all of the details that go under academic achievement status. So for ELA, math, science, and social studies, they look at the status. What did you earn? How did your students perform this year? All students and student groups. So that's what all the points earned, percentages, and then where those percentages put us on that other continuum. So as you can see here in 2024, our status was all on track or at target, which was similar to 22 and 23. This one, this graph shows, or this table shows growth. So this is, again, ELA, math, science, and social studies, all students and student groups, growth in those areas. Again, before we had below average, average, and above average. In 22 and 23, we were average and below average. And as you can see in 24, we are at target for all but one, where we are on track. And this now shows our performance details for the areas of college and career readiness assessments. So that's ACT, ASVAB, all those assessments that students take to see if they're college and career ready, and our advanced credit. Our graduation rate, all of those, again, are lagging measures, so they're going to be the same from 23 to 24. The only one that is not a lagging measure is that graduate follow-up, where we check in on our graduates and check in to see if they are in school or having a job. I will preface it that our graduating class is 90 to 100 students, depending on the year, and that is based on a percentage of those students that meet the criteria that DESE sets out. So we usually are there between those 3 and 4 points because of that measure. So this year we were on target with that, or on track with that. And then this last one shows for the improvement plan, so that's our strategic plan, response to standards. How do we say that we responded to the MSIP 6 standards? Climate and culture survey, kindergarten readiness, ICAP, attendance, all of these different areas that we get points for. We met all of that, and then you can see with attendance, we went from floor to approaching to on track. So we've made some increase and some movement there. And this last graph just sort of, or this visual, shows you all the different categories where you can earn points and where they fell. So you can see across the board we are on track or at target. Any questions for me about the APR?
I have a question. Again, I'd like to extend my congratulations to the administration, teachers, staff, students for all the work they've done to increase these scores. Just shush me. Anyway, but the other thing too is that, and perhaps Dr. McGee could elaborate a little bit about this, because now that we have this grade scorecard, it might be going away soon, because we planned ahead, and our strategic plan actually allows us to sort of customize what we might look like in the future. So if you want to talk just a little bit about that.
Yeah, so last year, I don't have the date off the top of my head, but we passed a resolution to participate in the system design zone as a part of the Success Ready Student Network. As a part of that, we were a group of about 18 school districts that presented to the state board that we would like to participate in an alternative APR measure that will use different metrics to establish how we are doing. So we are now a member of about 90 districts across the state of Missouri that will be demonstrating growth in new ways. So we won't have a presentation like this. We won't have a sheet of paper that looks like the APR in the future. But we worked at our last board committee to talk about what of these metrics really matter to us. And we get to build a dashboard that exists on our website, updated more often, so it doesn't have lagging indicators like this, and tell our story to our community in new, fun, and creative ways. So we are excited about that journey, and our waiver will last for the next 3 years, as the state is also, we're part of a work group that builds a new assessment system. So we are engaged in opportunities to rethink the way schools are compared, ranked, sorted, and potentially aspire to be something different.
Very exciting.
So I have a question. Thank you very much. And yes, I want to extend also my congratulations to the district for such a great score in the APR. What are we doing with this data that we have now? What are some of the decisions that you're expecting to make?
I can actually answer that one. So it's used in a variety of ways. All of our schools have professional learning communities, and I do want to say that APR data is great, but we use our local benchmark assessments for decision making. So teachers actually use that data during their PLCs to plan. They make strategic groups. We discuss data during my collaborations with principals in regards to students who are not making growth and the changes that they're making through their multi-tiered systems of support teams. So it's used to inform decision-making and actually changes that are happening programmatically if those need to happen. So I think the teachers do a great job of that. We're seeing evidence of that in the preliminary data that's coming in from the second administration of the benchmarks for STAR for elementary school, and we have additional assessments taking place in January, but we are seeing the fruits of the labor that teachers are putting in and the interventions that they're putting in place as well.
Yeah, I think to your point, this individual student data our interim benchmarks are definitely more appropriate for that. Yes. However, I did use a lot of this data at the standard level. I went into a lot of those PLCs and was like, which standards did we do really well in? Which standards did we struggle in? Let's look at our curriculum. Did we skip over this for a reason? Did we teach it after this? Do we need to re-hit this again? Just not so much test prep, but just making sure that our curriculum is aligned to Missouri Learning Standards, at least the priority standards. So we did that work. And then with the College and Career Readiness assessments, we use this information to make sure we are giving the appropriate assessment to students at the time of at their 11th or 12th grade year. Make sure it's an assessment that is meaningful to them based on some of these results that we're seeing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
we have the program evaluation of health services by Mr. Vincent Strada.
Yes. Hi, good evening, school board, Maplewood community. Let's see here. Trying to get, there we go. Okay, I'm here to talk about our health services program, and I'm just the messenger because the real heroes here are our school nurses, and they've always been part of the student services team, but when we went through COVID together, we became besties, you know, and I really appreciated the amount of courageous work that they did, and they're amazing. So I want to acknowledge them first. We have 3 fantastic school nurses full-time. Catherine Whitehouse, who works at the elementary school, spent 9 years here as a student from kindergarten through 9th grade, and her mom was a longtime employee here, Mary Darst. Angel Goldberg, another longtime resident, fully committed to this place, sent all 3 of her sons here. She's amazing and works extremely hard. And our newest recruit, Megan Crombie, also has kids at the ECC, and actually we recruited her from the open house. She came to visit, we're like, we need a school nurse. And she applied, and she's been fantastic. So I want to really publicly acknowledge their work. And talk a little bit about what they do. So this is an overview of their duties. Many of them are pretty self-explanatory. I do want to highlight a couple of things that might be, there are trends that we're kind of monitoring, and this is an equity issue, and we are thrilled to provide the support, but we have an increasing number of students with pretty significant medical needs. And we're committed, they're our students, and we're committed to having them in our spaces. But it has kind of, it has made us think a little bit about staffing and how we train and provide supports districts building-wide, particularly at the Early Childhood Center. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. But those are some typical things you will see. They're also often our public kind of health point person, you know, so if there's an issue, strep throat, anything going on in school, they're often communicating with our communities about that work. And you might be surprised to see at number 9, they're also part of our social emotional support team. There are students that come to the nurse for a break from their school, from their day. And we were really strategic in placing our school health nurse offices near our counselors or near some support. So if they need that, our nurses have good instincts and they'll connect them with either the social worker or the counselor in our buildings. That kind of gives you an overall view of their work. The things I kind of wanted to kind of examine in this program evaluation were utilization rates. Does our staffing plan really meet our needs? And does it make a difference? Like, does having full-time nurses make a difference in terms of kids remaining in school? And what are the trends and patterns that we're seeing? It's amazing to me, I know I'm old, but when I first started working here, you know, there were 5 buildings in the district. We had 1 nurse. They spent Monday at one school, Tuesday at the other. I don't know how we function, but it seemed like to be normal, but we really need these folks. And, you know, I love working here, and I hope that I contribute and support your families and staff, but if I miss work tomorrow, we'll be okay. Like, and we really will. And the teachers are critically important to our spaces too. And when teachers are not there and we have to cover for them, the kids won't get as good of instruction. But there are a lot of teachers in the building and we can get through the day. They'll be safe and cared for. When our nurse is out, it is tough. It's really tough. And we'll talk a little bit more about our staffing kind of concerns about that, because when they're out, there's not other nurses in the building that can do some of the work that they do. And we really feel it. And I've sat in the nurse's office kind of filling in and hoping for the best. Please don't come in with a broken arm. You know, I can give you Tylenol, but please don't come in with an injury, with your arm belt. And, I mean, really, and they really do critical work. I was talking to Megan Crombie, she had worked in a hospital in ICU, and she said, Vince, this work is more challenging in some ways, because when I was in the hospital setting, there were other nurses around. But here, it's me. And she loves it, but it is really challenging work in many ways. Here's a little bit of our staffing, and Tanisha's not here right now, but she probably can't even believe that we had a half-time nurse at the ECC 15 years ago, and only 3/4 10 years ago. But just to kind of give you some context, about 2/3 of the schools have a full-time nurse nationally, about 1/4 have a part-time, and 7% of schools have no school nurse. This board has been fully committed to school nursing for several years now, over 10 years. We have 3 full-time nurses that are both RNs and BSN, which is pretty highly qualified folks, and they are excellent. So our staffing's good, and we appreciate your support on that. Utilization rates. We have to report on this every year, so I just pulled the data. Catherine actually prepared it. There were over 15,000 health service visits last year. That's every student going 10 times. Now, I know Not every student go to the nurse 10 times over the year. But it is sort of striking how often we're seeing folks. The good news is that the vast majority of them go back to class. You can see that 14,000 plus went back to class, and we had to call the emergency three times. So that kind of gives you a sense of the scope of their work. When you look at the building utilizations, then that sort of tracks in terms of the size of those buildings, but between 25 to 35 visits a day, and if you think about a 7-hour day, that's pretty steady work, especially since some of the kids are there for a while. This is the most important thing I want to kind of underscore here, is that when there's a full-time nurse, only 6% of the kids are sent home. And that tracks with our data as well. When there's not a nurse, 18%. And I can tell you, when I fill in for the nurse, they're going home. Because I don't know, I'm like, call your mom, you don't feel well, and that's really, and it's a safety thing, because I'm not a nurse, so they probably should go home. But it really makes a difference. So I think it's money well spent. These are some of the trends and patterns that we're seeing, and these are pretty typical. I think the one thing I wanted to point out, and I mentioned it earlier, is we do have students and are young learners now, but they're going to go through our system that have pretty involved medical needs, and we have to kind of really be thinking about how to maybe reimagine our staffing and support for those kiddos. But these are the kind of things you would commonly see: daily meds, PRN and medication access, et cetera. This is also another part of our report, is chronic health conditions. We have 148 students last year that were diagnosed with asthma. Most of those kiddos are pretty self-sufficient. They have inhalers in our spaces, and they can access them when they need them. A few of them use nebulizers, but that group is pretty independent. We have a lot of students identified with allergies that we have to pay attention to. Some carry EpiPens with them. We have had an uptick in kids with seizure disorders, which is of concern, and our staff knows that we're doing vector training on seizure disorders, but vector training helps you with your awareness. It doesn't really, it sort of like helps you know a little bit about it, but still it can be very jarring and difficult, and we want to do a good job supporting those students. And diabetes is also something we help kids manage. So here's kind of our recommendations. As I was talking about the increase in medical challenges, we want to kind of increase access to first aid supplies in our classrooms. So if they just need a Band-Aid or a Q-tip or some Vaseline or something that they can maybe just get in their rooms, that would be helpful in terms of kind of, we don't mind seeing them in a nurse's office, but if there's a real serious medical emergency and a kid comes down for something that could have been taken care of in a classroom, it's better for the kid who needs the actual help. We also want to, our staffing is challenging when the nurse is out, not getting lunch breaks, overextended. So we really do have to increase some training for our building staff who aren't RNs to kind of at least cover the health office for a short period of time, making sure kids can get their daily meds, prescription meds, et cetera. So we want to kind of have more of a systemic approach to that. And we also have to continue to kind of, and I'll talk to Dr. Amber Seals about that, looking at our staffing sub-shortage, because there is. When the nurse is out, we have a very hard time finding the sub. Difficult, almost impossible. And we're paying too much when we get them. The agencies that, and Dr. Jameson knows that the agencies that do this work, they charge a pretty penny for that. But there is a way to maybe bring in some health office aides that can at least staff the office and provide some level of support there. And the last thing is emergency action plans. So for some of the students that we have that have some of the more involved medical needs, there are things that can probably happen in the classroom with some of our teaching and paraprofessionals and teachers' assistants. So really being clear about how to support those kids in their classroom spaces. They don't always have to go to the nurse. So those are our recommendations. Any questions?
Do you have any estimate as to what the cost would be to train or certify people to provide services for health plans, emergency action plans?
I think the emergency, actually I don't think there will be a lot of cost at all. At least at the way we're imagining it. I think what we're talking about is, like for example, like let me answer that two ways. So in terms of training staff, they could do like manage the office, like prescription meds and over-the-counter medications. We can do that with vector training, very basic training in-house with no cost. And we would be training staff who are already there. So it's a matter of really thinking about if you have a building sub, building secretary, someone that can cover the office for a half an hour. So we're talking about that's no cost at all. In terms of those emergency action plans, our initial thought wouldn't be much cost necessarily. So for example, we had a kid, let's say we had a student with a serious medical condition that we think in consultation with the doctor, that there's things that can happen in the classroom. So it's about outlining a plan that says, if you see this in the class, do this. So it's really just training our existing staff. So I don't think it'd be an extra cost in terms of our initial drafting of that. We'll just provide more clarity in terms of who can do what to support those students. So for example, if you have a student with diabetes and they run real high and low, there's things you can do in the classroom that don't require them going to the nurse. So it's more about training their staff to kind of help them manage. So I think we want to do a better job with training our internal resources before we would add any costs. And I think that's probably a better way for the flow of the building, and also those kids know those people, so it's probably better off doing it that way anyway. So that's our initial thought. So we weren't really even thinking about cost per se.
Well, I guess my question is there some sort of state requirement for certification, or, I mean, I'm essentially thinking about like a liability issue.
Yeah,
Like,
there is. Well, you can do some training for non-medical staff to manage the health office. Yes, under the supervision of the nurse. So the nurse will lead directions. Yeah, because when I cover the space, I am not a certified medical person, but I'm under the supervision. I'm talking with our other nurses, and I do some of that vector training, so I can give out prescription meds, over-the-counter meds, do the very basics. Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so we can cover ourselves there, but they are limited somewhat.
I'm sorry, to follow up on that, so are there state laws requiring, say, a nurse in a certain number of buildings? Are there laws that say what level of certification they have to have?
I wouldn't say there's laws. There are some recommendations about that, because there are some places that don't. Like, there are a lot of districts that just manage with health office aides and things like that. So there's a lot of recommendations, and we meet and exceed those right now at MRH. I think the certification has to do with what they can do when they're in that space. You know, so for example, if you have a school and you just have a health office aide, they can do very basic things, and then everything else they got to call the parent or call 911 or call emergency medical personnel. That happens in parts of the country and parts of the state. So it really is about what they can do in their current training and certification. Yeah, and we do a pretty good job with the recommended staffing in terms of school nurses.
But whether they're an RN or a CNA license?
Yeah, so we can to have a nurse. If you could have an LPN, RN, or BSN. That kind of gives you what all count for nursing as a full-time nurse in your building. And we've been fortunate to have RNs and BSN so far. Yeah, but anything that's not LPN, RN, or BSN, then you're kind of talking about staffing that differently, and it really limits what you can do. I have a bunch of former administrators that used to supervise nurses around here. Great. Yeah, I mean, they're great. I don't know if you ever met or worked school nurses. They're really fantastic folks, man. They work hard. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you all.
moving on to finance, Mr. Holzer, again.
Okay, let's get into it. So here's the chart for the November financials, where local sources, where all of the sources of our revenue, including local, which is the vast majority of State. Through November, we're right around $5 million collected on our revenue. I pause here and say that we have started to receive our tax receipts for the year, which is always a welcome sight. So we've received 2 distributions in December, and we should receive at least 2 in November, and by the time that's done, it will just trickle in the months subsequent to that. So you can see here the increases are related to what you see before you, and also I was informed, Dr. Bouchard is still here, we did receive the $40,000 scrap tire grant from the state today, and that's what paid for the board-in-place playground surfacing over the ECC. So thank you for all the hard work that it took, including Dr. Diedrich, to get that one over the line, including all of the paperwork. So here's the expenditures and the percentage breakdown for salaries, benefits, purchase service, supplies, capital outlay, and debt that falls into the operating budget. All right, the expenses. We're at 7.1 expenditures across all categories of the operating budget. 7.1 million, excuse me. Purchase services through November are 1.2 million, or 30% of the budget. I'm rounding if you hadn't noticed that. Supplies are comparable to the prior year at 731,000. versus the prior year, so we're slightly down there. Capital expenditures are right around that $250,000 mark. They are a little bit higher than the prior year. And long and short-term debt, this is related to the certificates of participation or the lease purchase proceeds at $57,000 or 20% of the budget. That was our first interest payment. We do have one interest payment and one principal payment yet to make this fiscal year. All around, we are about $9.4 million on the expense side. I will say there was a question last month about the bond funds, and that was a collation error. We had multiple versions, and as I was reviewing, I caught that very error, and I dropped the new one in and deleted the wrong one. So I do apologize for that error, but that was simply a collation error. As we get into the purchase services as well, I received a question last night when I should have been sleeping, when all of us should have been sleeping. But that's okay. Happy to answer it. So there was an increase in purchase services due to the budget amendment, and those were related to the refugee grant, the FCAN grant, the ITEF grant, Title II. That was about $47,500 there, increase in expenditures on the grants. And also, we've got the salary that we moved from, moved salaries over into purchase services for the accounting position as we were using a consultant. And also, since we're down bus drivers, we're also paying for we're renting those drivers, and they are driving our buses. So when we do things like that, we'll transfer those salaries over into the purchase services, because that's the proper purchasing category. And as it relates to the accounting position, now that we have one, we'll be transferring the bulk of that back over into salary. So you'll see that shift again the next amendment that I bring.
Thank you.
Very welcome. And here is the trend, and I think this is a good period to, this illustrates what I discussed earlier about the typical arc of school revenue and funding. So you can see back in 2019, we were around that 38, and we were just about there the end of last year, this year. So you can see that we've completed the arc and are now ready to hit the next one. Any questions?
No? All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, so now we're doing board communications and discussions, calendar of events. The only thing I see on the calendar is that the deadline for being a candidate for the Board of Education is closing on the 31st. All right, obviously school just ended with exams, and I know that there have been a slew of sports activities and club activities and speech and debate and mock trials and whatnot. Seems like everybody had a great time. Great for, you know, all your hard work. They did some stuff, some, you know, I don't know what they do. And you know, maybe with a yeah, they argue, right?
As
so
teens do.
yeah, I don't know anything about that. So let's see, where were we? Yeah, did we?
I just had something on that.
Oh, you have something for the patrol?
Well, it was just a suggested change. I meant to bring it up in our work session last time, but for next year on our budget sort of timeline, perhaps putting in a work session in the beginning to talk about the budget directive, and then we can craft it together. So
sure.
I think in looking at it, it was October or November made sense. So people think.
I would suggest October, because with the new budget timeline that was brought forward, we bring that in November, so October work session would work.
All right, that sounds perfect. So do you want to put that on for next session to vote on, or do we need to vote on that?
No.
Do people,
All right.
people in agreement? Do
Everybody
people like
in
that
agreement?
plan?
Great suggestion. So now, the PAL board report. You can stand up if you want, or sit down.
So, would you guys rather have me sit or I can stand up there?
You know what? I'd like you to stand.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
schools as metaphors. So when we were meeting with the other PAL boards, we talked to them a lot about content and styles of teaching, but a larger focus was our schools as metaphors. So as you guys know, each of the schools has a different metaphor that they kind of surround the curriculum with. The ECC is known as school as metaphor, the elementary is school as museum, the middle school is school as expedition, and the high school is school as apprenticeship. And so after, which I'll get into a little bit later, we wanted to ask and that we prioritize funding for our school's metaphor when discussing the district's budget. So I want to be clear that we're not necessarily asking that we increase the budget right now, because I know that that is a big conversation, but I do ask that when we are looking at the budget, that we make sure that we protect it because of the impacts that it makes to so many students. So starting off, we kind of directed to each of the strategic plan committees and groups, so how it benefits our students. So from the actual committee meeting, they said that a large discussion was that they kind of expanded an understanding of what a school metaphor entails and how it affects students. So we did some research, and it says that metaphors can indirectly elicit students' general understanding of learning. When students think of learning, they often think about, sitting at a desk and taking notes. But through these very unique ways that we are teaching learning, like school as metaphors and school as expedition, students are learning through very diverse perspectives that they don't usually get. We've also gained a lot of positive feedback from students. They even note looking forward to metaphors. One of the interactions that I had with an elementary school student when we were talking about it was them transitioning from 6th grade to middle school. What they were most excited about was having a new metaphor, and that they got to be school as expedition, which I thought was really unique and super cool. And then for our communities and for our people, kind of had a lot of overlap. As the elementary is okay. The elementary is the school as museum, and so this is open to all the community members and students. I remember when I did it, my brother's currently doing it, so they get really excited about having these museums, and they've worked really hard towards it. So being able to show that off to maybe friends and family or even just community members is a really large thing, and it has students kind of be proud of their work. It also promotes creativity because there are all these unique ways of learning. Something also unique about it is that community volunteers are a part of it. Community volunteers maybe help out at expeditions if they need a little extra hand, but what I noticed most is the capstone night. That just recently happened, and they had a bunch of community volunteers come in and judge these students. The high school is known as school as apprenticeship, which often doesn't get a lot of notice for its metaphor because it doesn't have a tangible moment like school as museum, like school as expedition. But as school as apprenticeship, a capstone night kind of opens these opportunities for students and connect with people that are experts in their field. So I thought that that's super unique and how that kind of benefits the community as well as the people. It also fosters a united community with common goals and builds a vision for the future. When I was talking to the elementary school students, they talked about how when they'd be learning in class and looking towards a project, that their teacher would often frame something as, hey, this might have an opportunity to go into the museum. So they would want to make it their best work. They wanted to make sure that they actually learned what was happening. So if they saw it at the museum, they would be able to actually explain what they learned. It also allows people of all ages from all parts of the community to understand this kind of vision. Like I said, I think Capstone Night is a really great example of it. You're having high school students connect with older adults and experts in their field and learn from them. And then this is one of the largest parts of why it's so beneficial. It's for our health. So metaphors provide a fun and educational experience. It's critical to students' enjoyment of school. Like I said, a lot of students have a difficult time learning from the straight, notes taking, and we all know that there's different ways of learning, but by having a unique way and kind of something like an enjoyable way for students to learn is super important. And therefore, it also increases overall engagement in the material because, it's fun to learn. And then metaphors at each school give students tools that they need to thrive. The ECC in the elementary, their main focus is more creative outlets, and younger students really need that because of their development, because they're trying out these new things, and having creative ways of learning them kind of build up their personality. The middle school gives them a connection to the outdoors because they're in that kind of weird period in their life, a large transition. So being able to go outside and having unique ways of learning is super important. And then the high school, something that they stress a lot is how they're preparing you to move on to the next step of your life. So by being in school as apprenticeship and having professional development is super important. And then something else that I want to stress is how beneficial it is for our resources. So proper funding brings our metaphors to life, and by better funding, we have better benefits. So like I said, community engagement. These students often get to relate to community members and engage with them to be able to improve their metaphor and their personal learning. And it also improves their creative process, which is super important. This also is supporting teachers to build metaphors in their classrooms. So if we are looking towards the budget and we decide to maybe cut out some of the metaphors, but we still want them to prevail, teachers might have to go through ulterior motives to be able to do that, like buying supplies for their classroom, and that is the last thing that we want. So if we continue to prioritize that, we don't have that happen. Especially in the ECC and the elementary, this quote was provided to us by a sample handbook. So learning is driven by children's interests and questions, often through long-term projects. And I feel like that quote is very important because I think it just best summarizes what I'm trying to convey, is that these like long-term projects, having these metaphors and a staple for students are super important for their future learning. And something else is that all of these long-term projects not only create an impact for the students and through the strategic plan and through the community and people, but it also helps create the portrait of a graduate. It boosts their creative thinking skills. It makes them better communicators and collaborators, and these are all super important. And like I said, without metaphors, we wouldn't have this image of an MRH graduate. So, do we have any questions?
Great job.
Thank you.
And you were part of the team that just did something, right?
Oh, speech and debate?
Yeah.
All of them.
So
She's a state champion from last year, if you didn't know that. No, I'm just saying, she is a state champion.
Well,
yeah.
There you go. So how was it?
How was the tournament?
Yeah.
I mean, I liked it. I had fun.
There you go. All right. Heard it here, folks. All right. It's fun.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, awesome.
All right, where are we now? Committee reports. So, let's see. There were a bunch of committees meeting and doing stuff.
I can jump in. I used the Google form to report from the school board's professional learning community for St. Louis County. There is a legislative update kind of advocacy group that meets monthly. A few highlights from that meeting is a recommendation that school districts invite representatives to visit our schools. We have a new rep. We have a returning state senator. We have obviously a number of new leaders under this new administration at the state. So some of our peer districts in the region have been inviting those folks to come and just understand the impact of the kinds of legislation that they may be proposing and how that is playing out in real life in the schools. There's already been hundreds of bills filed that could impact education in Missouri. Also, there's a link in here. It's not a hyperlink since this is a PDF of a Google form, but our colleagues in Melville have created a bill tracker that they are making available on their district website and encouraged others to utilize that should we want to follow some of the specific education-related work this session, which will begin in January.
I recently was on the For Our Students committee with Ms. Kaufman, and it's actually, you heard a little bit about it from Dr. McGee, how we're trying to transition from the APR scorecard into something that is a little bit more tailored to our goals, what we find to be important. That's not to say that all of the stuff the state requires is going away. All of that stuff is already incorporated into it, but we just sort of get to add our own, I guess, special flavor or sauce on it or whatever. So I'm super excited about that. Another item that came up was changing some of our. You'll have to forgive me. I don't even remember what this is called, but it's the ACT work keys, which is a way to show preparedness for non-traditional college paths, where you'd say like, okay, how prepared are our students to go into trades or whatever. It's just another metric for us to be able to look at our students, and I feel like I'm excited about that because it is. It gives us a broader overview of all of our students, and it's going to, give us more opportunities to sort of fill in gaps and measures, and give people opportunity to do things that they're interested in. Additionally, I think that there's some recommendations that are going to be brought back probably the January meeting, and then I also attended the governing council for Special School District. And they voted on their budget for that. It was my first meeting. I was filling in, but it was a very interesting experience. It seemed like it was kind of interesting to listen to. Not to maybe to toot our horn a little bit, but those surrounding districts were not as happy as we were about things that were going on. So I think we're doing some great stuff here. There was an initiative that I thought was pretty interesting they brought up, which was a program to help provide power lift chairs to students, a pilot program, because I guess that, one, those things are extremely expensive, but they also, help provide, a mechanism for students to learn how to use the chairs so that insurance will then cover the chairs. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but they're basically like, you have to learn how to drive it before you can get it to learn how to drive it. So whatever. Anyway, so that was what was going on there. I don't know if any other people want to talk about their committees.
Yeah, for our health met, we talked about something I'm pretty excited about, changing our SEB screener potentially. They proposed going from the SRSS to the Sabres. The benefit of that, one is that it's no additional cost to us, but then also it allows for student input. So as the teacher rating the student to see whether or not they see concerns, the student is able to fill it out themselves, so we can kind of get an idea from their perspective, like what's going on. So I thought that was really interesting. We also talked about potentially looking at a different curriculum for the middle and high school, because second step is due up. Is that right? I'm gonna make sure I'm right. And so we talked about that and kind of the steps that we would take if we were looking for new curriculum and kind of the rollout, what that would look like. We also talked about kind of creating almost like a database of short video clips that parents can access maybe through the website or whatever. Let's say they are struggling or their students struggling with anxiety, so they can just look up these, maybe 1, 2, 3 minute clips to give us some information, just kind of answer some simple questions that they may have. If it's 9 o'clock at night, they could have access to it. So, and we talked a little bit about a new PD that they were doing, a conference style PD to help teachers learn to kind of use restorative practices and embed them in the classroom on a daily basis. And so it sounds like there's some really good things happening.
Can I ask a question? The board received an email message from a student, I believe, as part of one of their capstone projects, and this is not the first time that a capstone project has touched on the quality and content of the sex ed curriculum. I'm wondering if that is something we could refer to the For Our Health Committee to potentially explore with student input.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in favor
You can
of
handle
that.
that, right, Vince?
Okay. School board election updates. Like I said, Reese, a few minutes ago, the closing for filing will be on December 31st. Right now, we've got three candidates: a Daniel Peterson, Mr. Matz, and Julie Francois, Brian Matz, for those of you that don't know Brian. And that's it. So if you are interested, sign up. There you go. And now we are moving on to action items, and I believe we have.
We're gonna amend, right, to. Move to amend the agenda to include budget directive, action item?
And the warrant list.
And the warrant list, yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, all right, motion passes. All right, so can I get a motion on the warrant list, please?
Motion to approve the warrant list as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? No? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
All right, so 2 abstentions. All right, I think that passes. All right, so then the next one, can I get a motion to approve the budget directive?
Motion to approve the budget directive provided with
Katie Hoffman's edits, that is the version.
that we are approving.
Correct. All right, can I get a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? No? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Oh, did you abstain?
I abstain.
Okay, all right, 1 abstention. All right,
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
all in favor? Aye. All right, great. All right, thanks a lot, guys.